Hey everyone, it's Tim again. Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to read one of the more exciting parts of my first novel, The Dragon and the Whites. This is the first novel of the Dragon and the Whites series, and this really kicks off the story of Trygve, Liam, and the rest of the crew. If you haven't read it yet, I'm not going to read anything that really is a spoiler, but I'm hoping that it's exciting and you'll want to read. So this is going to be in chapter 12, and we're going to start at the top of page 174. So leading up to this, the dragon has found an airplane flying through the air and is interested in what's going on and goes to check it out. And we'll see what happens during that interaction. Follow along. Get a load of this, Bob, started the receptionist at Eastern Slopes Airport. Some kid just called me and said that a dragon was chasing an airplane heading our way from the north. I don't know what kind of television shows these kids are watching these days, but their imaginations are getting a little too creative for my liking. Bob, over in the control building, chuckled over the phone. He was about to respond with another joke when he noticed that the radar scan showed that there were, in fact, two small craft approaching their position. One was a small Cessna, identified as TK-421, flying at 5,000 feet. The other was unidentified and flying around 6,000 feet. Staring at the screen, he absentmindedly hung up the phone. "Hey, Mike," Bob said nervously. "Weren't you just trying to reach an unidentified aircraft in the area?" "Yep," Mike exclaimed. "That bastard up there is really starting to piss me off. First, he's scaring this other plane who keeps trying to get him on the radio. Then he's tailing it. And now he's ignoring my calls. I was thinking about calling the Air Force Tower on him." Just then, another call came in on the radio. "Eastern Slopes ground, Cessna Tango Kilo 421 again. This guy is making me nervous and I want to put down immediately," the pilot said. "Cessna Tango Kilo 421, we can't blame you. You were clear to land on runway 1, replied the comms officer. "Roger Wilco, coming in now," the pilot answered. On the radar screen, the tower controller saw the Cessna descend toward the designated runway. Looking through the windows, they watched the plane as it approached and readied for landing. Curiously, they noticed that the second object was also coming in and traveling faster than before. "Mike," Bob said, "hand me those binoculars over there, will you?" Taking a better look at the sky before them, Bob finally got a good visual inspection of the second thing. It was a large flying lizard, all right, and it was coming this way. Trygve, carefully watching every movement of his prey below, noticed that it was picking up speed and descending towards a big, long line off in the distance. Wanting to catch it in the air before it could land, the dragon tucked his wings in close to his body and rapidly dove towards the unsuspecting bird below. Looking through their binoculars, the two men in the control building watched helplessly as the thing closed in behind the Cessna. As they both drew near to the airport, the men's fears were confirmed. It was definitely a dragon. Bob called the local police station and asked for responding officers, a fire truck, and an ambulance. He purposely left the dragon portion out of the description, knowing that they wouldn't believe him. Mike, in the background, reconnected with the Cessna and helped talk the pilot in to land on the tarmac. Coming up on the bird, Trygve didn't know what to make of it. It had a metallic nature and didn't flap to fly. It just flew straight where it wanted to, perhaps with the help of the unusual spinning wheel on its nose. He closed to within 5 feet of the airplane's tail. Sniffing the air, he smelled burning oils and minerals. Banking to the right, he flew alongside of the bird to get a better look. What he saw next he could scarcely believe. Inside the bird, through some clear material covering the outer surface, was a very frightened human staring back at him. The bird human suddenly dove sharply, putting distance between them. Trygve, still hungry and much angered by this deception, tucked his wings in and sped after the descending prey. Catching back up with the flying object, he began warming up his promethium glands and prepared to attack. Opening his mouth, he lined up behind the tail and unleashed a burst of fire. The gout struck the rear of the aircraft and burned away a chunk of the tail rudder, but it remained airborne. Trygve lined up again and shot another burst of flame at the right wing. Watching in horror from the control building, Mike and Bob stood frozen in fear. All they could do was try to talk the pilot in, but he went hysterical the moment that the dragon started shooting fire at the plane. And who could blame him? They watched as the plane rapidly dropped to just 100 feet above the runway, thankfully still on an approach vector. The dragon followed closely behind, shooting small gouts of flame at the plane as they both came in close to the ground. It almost seemed as if the dragon was merely toying with the pilot. The plane choppily approached the runway and touched down lightly with one wheel, then two, leaving behind a small cloud of rubber as the smoke heated up the asphalt. Swaying dangerously side to side from the lack of control panels left to the pilot, the two men couldn't believe that he actually pulled this landing off. As the plane came to a halt, they watched the pilot frantically undo his harness. Just as he was about to open the door, the Dragon alighted beside the plane and ignited the side of the aircraft with the dousing of dragon fire. Covered in light oil spatters from the barely operational engine, the sheet metal of the craft lit up brightly as the flames consumed the material. The pilot jumped away from the torch side and tried to open the other door, hoping that the Dragon would not see the change of tactic. Realizing that his prey was trying to escape, Trigby jumped onto the left wing of the aircraft and tipped it sideways until the wingtip crumpled into the ground. The craft kicked up at a 45-degree angle, rolling the pilot across the cabin until he fell against the hot metal interior of the cabin. Trigby crunched his way along the wing, digging his clawed feet into the light sheet metal skin of the mechanical bird. As his weight moved along the length of the wing, the plane slammed back down onto its wheels and leveled out again. The pilot was rocked backwards against the other wall and fell to the pavement. Just as the Dragon was rearing its head up to unleash another torrent of liquid fire against the injured craft, a string of vehicles with lights and sirens blazing came around the corner of the road and quickly drove onto the tarmac. Police cars of both local and state troopers converged around the burning airplane and surrounded the Dragon in a semicircle. Trigby, surprised by the intruders, paused mid-breath and let the fire extinguish in his mouth. Despite his rage, flashbacks of cannon fire filled his mind with dread. Looking around, he noticed that each man and woman pointed similar weapons in his direction, yelling commands back and forth to each other that he could not comprehend. While he had learned many human words over the centuries, these words were coming out too quickly from too many sources, and many words that he had never heard before. Panning his head back and forth across the gathering of humans, he noticed that several were looking a little jumpy. While they all had their weapons drawn and pointing at him, two were shaking their hands slightly and looking ready to attack. Trigby would not let them have the advantage. If he was going to act, he needed to do it now. Feeling an imminent threat coming, Trigby roared at his challengers, gnashing his teeth in the air, hoping to provoke a reaction. The frightened officers clenched down on the triggers of their rifles, firing two concurrent 3-round bursts at him. Several rounds pinged harmlessly against the hull of the aircraft, but two of them grazed the scales on Trigby's back and deflected off into the air. While these failed to penetrate his natural armor, they did hurt quite a bit. The Dragon realized that these weapons were far more advanced than the weaker weapons which he had encountered in the past. After the first two humans shot at Trigby, the rest joined in. They fired countless rounds at the Dragon, who ducked behind the plane for protection. He roared at his attackers, hoping to scare them off. Lying still on the floor of the plane behind the front seats, the pilot felt the plane slam back onto the pavement as the sounds of police and fire rescue sirens filled the air. Holding on to anything that he could, he fought to arrest his movement with each violent jolt of the small craft. Afraid to expose himself to the Dragon, which was still sitting on top and next to the plane, he kept his head low below the line of the windows. Trying to slow his breathing and calm down his racing heart, he didn't want the Dragon to hear him. With everything going on outside, the Dragon might just forget that he was still inside and leave him alone. He had almost convinced himself to remain in the plane and just hoped that the Dragon would go away. But then the shooting started. Hearing the burst from the officers outside, he decided that it was time to go. Hoping the Dragon would be sufficiently distracted by the gunfire, he carefully pushed the door open. Looking outside, he froze in terror. Keeping his head below the top of the mechanical bird, Trigby shielded himself from the human's gunfire. While some of the impacts were barely perceptible, he knew that a direct hit to one of his weak spots would cause immense pain. He did not wish to relive those experiences if he could avoid it. As he tucked his head below the wing, a tiny door popped open right next to his face. Inside the new opening, there was a tiny human staring directly at him. This was the same human who had taunted him up in the air with his abominable false flight, trying to take to the air in contrast to how nature had designed his puny little body. Startled by his son's appearance and suspecting that the man had summoned the other warriors to attack him, Trigby decided to strike first before this creature could cause any further harm. Grabbing the door with his front claws, he braced himself against the frame of the craft, opened his mouth, and roared a fiery discharge of physically manifested anger into the cabin. The pilot and everything else inside were incinerated, melted, and blasted into their base elements as the Dragon unleashed his rage. The windows burst outward as jets of flame propelled shards of glass and debris out into the atmosphere. The humans attacking Trigby ceased firing as they braced themselves behind their vehicles for cover, blocking their faces with their arms or jumping inside the doorways. They tried to shield themselves from the heat washing off of the burning plane wreckage. Fearful that a continued conflict may spell doom for him now that his protective cover was diminished, Trigby decided to create a distraction and flee the scene. Whipping his body around, he slammed what was left of the plane with his massive tail and launched a metallic scrap at the closest police car in the surrounding cluster. As the wreckage soared across the tarmac and crashed into the cruiser, Trigby belched a long stream of fire from left to right in a gigantic flaming arc of destruction. Watching the humans jump for cover and flee their burning vehicles, Trigby pumped his wings, pushed off with his mighty feet, and took to the air. As he flew away from the landing strip, he heard tiny shots being fired in his direction, thankfully, all in vain. He was too far away by now for them to pose much danger, despite their valiant efforts. It was time to return to his cave and plan his next move. So I hope you enjoyed that scene from The Dragon and the Whites. If you enjoyed it, please go out and buy the book. It's available in hardcover, paperback, ebook, and as an audiobook as well. Conrad Audet did a fantastic job narrating the book, much better than you just heard me speak the past few minutes. So you can check that out. That's exclusively through Audible. All the rest you can find at your favorite local bookstore and online at various sites of your choosing. So I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for sticking around and listening to me, and I hope you have a good night. All right, thanks again.